Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we step into the final calm before a national storm, into a year when the air itself seems tight with rumour, dread, and waiting. You move through America in 1860, where train whistles carry news. Church bells mark ordinary hours, and millions of black lives are lived under rules that can change from one county line to the next. What does a country sound like when it's pretending not to hear its own breaking point? What does daily life feel like when tomorrow might bring sale, separation, arrest, or some thin, stubborn kind of hope? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment your location and local time, so we can see where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself drift into a year that still calls itself ordinary, even as everything in it strains toward upheaval. You begin in darkness, long before sunrise, when the countryside is mostly sound and temperature. The night air sits cool against your skin. Damp earth gives off a rich, heavy smell. In the distance, a dog barks once, then stops, as if even it knows not to waste energy before dawn. Across much of the South, hundreds of thousands of black Americans are already sleeping lightly, because sleep itself is never fully secure. A cry from a baby, a footstep outside a cabin, the rasp of a hinge, any of these can pull you awake at once. In 1860, nearly 4 million enslaved black people live in the United States. That is the central fact beneath every other detail. It shapes where people stand, how they speak, what they own, and whether the law sees them as persons at all. Yet numbers alone do not tell you what a morning feels like. A statistic never shows the rough weave of a blanket, the smoke trapped in low rafters, or the ache in a shoulder that never quite heals. Inside one-room cabin, the air carries wood smoke, old straw, and the faint sourness of wet clothes drying too slowly. Several bodies may share one small space. Children turn in sleep. An older woman clears her throat softly. Someone has hidden a scrap of cloth, a button, a letter shape traced in dust. Some tiny possession that says, however quietly, I am still here. Historians disagree on many details of everyday plantation life, because records are uneven and often filtered through owners, overseers, or later memory. But no serious account misses the constant pressure of control. Outside, dawn begins as a grey wash. Roosters call, wheels creak, metal strikes metal from some nearby workyard. You can almost feel the day assembling itself piece by piece, practical and merciless. Enslaved life is not one uniform experience. A rice plantation in South Carolina differs from a tobacco farm in Virginia. An urban enslaved carpenter in Charleston lives differently from a field hand in Mississippi. Some work under task systems, where a set job is assigned. Others endure gang labour, watched in groups and driven by pace. Even the dirt underfoot changes. Sandy soil, black mud, hard clay. History, rather annoyingly, is always local. In free states, the morning looks different, though not as different as comforting myths would like. Free black Americans in 1860 lived mostly in the North and in some Upper South communities. But freedom does not mean safety. In many places, they face legal discrimination, restricted voting rights, segregated schools, barred occupations, and the constant threat of kidnapping under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. A person who's built a careful life in Philadelphia or Cincinnati may still listen for a knock at the door with a very fast pulse. So you move between worlds that share one country and one deep racial order. In one place, a woman rises before first light to prepare food over coals for the household that claims ownership over her labour. In another, a free black barber unlocks his small shop while pretending not to notice a white passerby staring just a little too long. In a port city, a black sailor shoulders rope that smells of salt and tar. In a rural county, a child is shaken awake and sent to fetch water from a stream cold enough to sting the fingers numb. Different settings, same century, same nation, same relentless hierarchy. The year itself carries a nervous pulse. It is 1860 and politics are everywhere, even when people do not name them aloud. Newspapers arrive damp with fresh ink. Men cluster around storefronts to argue over election talk. Names like Lincoln, Douglas, Breckinridge, and Bell move from mouth to mouth. White Americans debate union, slavery, secession, territory, and law, obvious as if black people are objects on a board rather than neighbours with ears and memory. But black Americans are listening closely. Of course they are. People whose lives are defined by policy tend to pay attention when policy starts pacing the floor. The sensory world matters because it is the world most people actually knew, not speeches, not statues, not the tidy paragraphs of school books written much later. 1860 through hooves in mud, hot coffee where coffee can be had, and cornmeal where it cannot be avoided. You know it through coarse shirts that scratch the neck, through the sharp scent of lye soap, through the sweetness of molasses on a rare good morning, through the throb of tired feet at the end of a day that began too early and ended too late. For enslaved families, uncertainty hangs over ordinary tasks like a second weather system. Marriage can be cherished without always being legally recognized. Children can be loved without being secure from sale. Parents can teach manners, prayer, caution, humour, and endurance, yet still know that another person holds the power to split the household with a signature. This is one of the cruelest truths of the period. Love is present everywhere, and the law treats it as incidental. In many southern places, Sunday clothes, if a family has them, are brushed and folded with care. A calico dress may be patched so neatly that patch and fabric almost become one. Men may carve something useful from wood in stolen evening minutes. Women may save seeds, bits of ribbon, or recipes held more in memory than on paper. Small things matter. They matter immensely. A clay pipe, a hidden coin, a special headscarf, a song begun under the breath. Such details do not erase oppression. They reveal personhood within it. A quirky little fact from the era drifts through the dust here. In some urban areas, black caterers and cooks, especially in northern cities and border regions, earned reputations so strong that elite white households competed for their services at major dinners. It is one of those oddly specific reminders that skill could be admired even while equality was denied. America had a real talent for wanting the labour, the craft, the flavour, the music, and the expertise while rejecting the full humanity of the people producing them. Not exactly a charming national habit. Meanwhile, religion and rumour weave through everyday life. A sermon heard in one church may be repeated in a field, a kitchen, a washyard, or a street corner. A newspaper item read aloud by one literate person may travel astonishing distances by memory alone. Stories of abolitionists, runaways, court cases, and political speeches spread in fragments. Sometimes the details are wrong. Sometimes they are distorted. Sometimes they are more emotionally true than factually exact. That is how rumour works in tense societies. It fills the spaces where official truth cannot be trusted. You notice, too, the many ways black Americans must read other people. A face at the market, a tone in a question, the mood of an overseer, the swagger of a patrolman, the slight kindness of a neighbour that might be real, or might vanish when tested. Social knowledge becomes survival knowledge. When to lower the eyes, when to stand straight, when to speak, when silence is wiser. It is exhausting. It is also highly skilled. Historians still argue over how much room individuals could create inside oppressive systems, but no one disputes the intelligence required simply to get through the day. Free black communities develop institutions where they can churches, mutual aid groups, schools, formal or informal, benevolent societies, burial associations, small businesses. These are not luxuries. They are structures of defense and dignity. In cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, Black communities sustain newspapers, political meetings, and reform networks, even while facing violent racism. White mobs had attacked black neighborhoods before 1860, and many families know that legal freedom can be frighteningly fragile when a crowd decides otherwise, in the countryside. Distance changes the rhythm, but not the stakes. Roads turn muddy after rain, wagons sink deep into ruts, pine smoke lingers in cool air, frogs thrum from marsh edges at night. Moonlight lays silver across cabins, fences and fields. A person walking after dark may listen for every crack of a twig. The land can be beautiful. Beauty does not make it safe. That tension sits everywhere in this year. Cotton blooms white under a broad sky. The sky is lovely. The labour beneath it is coerced. You also begin to sense how age shapes experience. Children may laugh, race, invent games, and tease one another, because children do that even in hard worlds. Yet they also learn quickly who can command them, who may strike them, and which questions should remain unasked. Elderly black Americans carry memory like a second body. Some remember Africa through parents or grandparents. Some remember the early republic. Some remember sail, escape, capture, childbirth, revival meetings, harvest seasons, funerals, and names erased from ledgers but not from family speech. An old person in 1860 may hold more true history in one evening story than an entire courthouse archive, and all the while, the nation edges toward rupture. Abraham Lincoln wins the presidential election in November 1860 without carrying the southern states. For many white Southerners committed to slavery, that result feels intolerable. Secession talk hardens. South Carolina will leave the Union in December. But in the daily life of black Americans, great political turning points arrive mixed with chores, weather, hunger, sewing, hauling, sweeping, praying, bargaining, and listening. History rarely announces itself with trumpets to the people most endangered by it. Often it arrives while water is being carried, bread is being cut, or a child is being hushed back to sleep. So the final year before war is not a waiting room. It is a lived world, thick with routines and constraints, intelligence and fear, tenderness and calculation. It is a place where black Americans make lives under conditions they did not choose. They work, watch, worship, joke, grieve, court, plan, and endure. They read danger in footsteps. They build meaning from scraps. They inhabit a republic that speaks of liberty with a straight face, which is almost impressive in its audacity. And as night closes again over 1860, the same sounds return in altered form. Crickets begin their steady music. A door closes somewhere. Ash settles in a hearth. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone hums a tune too softly to identify. Someone lies awake, staring into darkness, knowing that the country is changing, but not yet knowing whether change will arrive as rescue, disaster, or some terrible mixture of both. Morning begins as a sound before it becomes a light. A horn cuts through the dark. A bell follows. Somewhere, a fist strikes a doorframe. Somewhere else, a woman is already awake because she has learned to rise before the order comes. The air's cold enough to nip the skin, and the last of the night clings to the ground in a low, grey dampness. Smoke from banked fires hangs close to the cabins. It smells of ash, pine, and the faint bitterness of yesterday's coals stirred back to life. You step into the ordinary machinery of enslavement, which is one of the most chilling things about it. So much of it is routine, not dramatic, not theatrical, just regular, repeated, relentless. People stand, dress, shake off sleep, and begin moving because time here does not belong to them. It belongs to whoever claims the right to command it. In many places, breakfast is quick and plain. Cornbread, mush, salt pork, if any is given, molasses on a better day. The food sits heavy rather than satisfying. It is fuel, not pleasure. A child may eat too fast, then look around as if ashamed of hunger, though there is nothing shameful in it. A mother wipes a face with a damp cloth. A man ties a worn shoe with string because the leather split weeks ago. Fingers work quickly in the dim light. There is no room for slowness. The cabin itself is rough and practical. The floor may be hard-packed dirt or crude boards. The walls let in drafts. A blanket scratcher, a stool wobbles. The touch of everything is either coarse, splintered, or cold. Yet these spaces also carry marks of care, a gourd cleaned and saved, a peg holding a Sunday garment away from dust, a folded scrap of fabric too pretty to use for work. Little domestic triumphs survive even here. Very little space, very stubborn dignity. By first light, the Labour Day is already dividing people by age, strength, and assignment. On a cotton plantation, field hands gather tools and move toward rows that seem endless in the morning haze. On rice plantations in the coastal south, the work is wetter, more dangerous, and shaped by dikes, water levels, and heat that will later rise like a wall. Tobacco culture has its own season and pace. Sugar plantations in Louisiana are especially dreaded, with grinding labour during harvest and processing. Historians continue to debate which labour systems allowed slightly more autonomy in daily scheduling, but there is no debate that all of them rested on coercion. You feel that coercion most clearly in timing. Walk now, hurry there, lift this, carry that, stop talking, keep moving. An overseer, driver, or owner may stand nearby with a watchful stillness that is almost worse than shouting. The nervous system learns to measure distance by threat. How close is he? What mood is he in? Who was punished yesterday? Has anyone run? Did rain ruin the schedule? Did the mistress complain? Survival often depends on reading tiny signals faster than words can explain them. Not every plantation is large. In fact, many enslavers own relatively few people, and that creates a different intimacy, which is not a comforting word here. On small farms, enslaved black Americans may work within constant sight of the owner's family. There is less chance to disappear into a crowd, less room to soften the pace through quiet coordination, less anonymity. Everyone knows everyone's habits. Everyone knows who limps, who is pregnant, who has a cough, who can be trusted with tools, who may be sold, who is considered troublesome, which usually means a person has retained some visible core of self-respect, a dangerous habit, apparently. Children enter this world of labour early. Very young children might carry water, mind infants, gather chips for fuel, chase birds from crops, or perform errands that seem small only to people who have forgotten what childhood should feel like. Older children are drawn steadily into adult work. A boy may be handed a hoe before his shoulders are ready. A girl may be expected to cook, scrub, sew, and tend smaller children while still barely taller than the washpot. Their play does not vanish entirely. It just gets crowded into corners. The sounds of the morning multiply. Hoes strike earth, harness chains clink, horses snort into the cool air. Someone coughs deep in the chest. Someone starts a line of song, not loudly, just enough to settle breathing into rhythm. Work songs are not always grand or mysterious. Sometimes they are practical. Sometimes they pace movement. Sometimes they joke. Sometimes they carry sorrow in a form that can pass without punishment, because white listeners choose not to hear what is inside them. Underestimation, oddly enough, becomes one of the few available shelters. For women, the Labour Day often begins twice. once in the cabin, once in the field or house. Enslaved women may prepare food, dress children, and organize the morning before beginning grueling work assigned by others. In fields, they hoe, plant, weed, pick, haul, and endure heat with the rest. In domestic service, they cook, nurse, scrub, mend, polish, and remain under near constant scrutiny indoors. Neither setting is easy. Domestic labour may look lighter from a distance, but it demands alertness, emotional restraint, and endless deference in close quarters. Field labour is brutally physical. Both drain the body, both steal time. There is also the matter of clothing, which tells you much about daily life. Work garments are often issued cheaply and worn hard. Coarse cotton, rough wool, ill-fitting shoes, when shoes exist at all. Fabric rubs skin raw in heat and turns clammy in rain. Wet cuffs slap against ankles. In winter, cold seeps through every gap. The body is never allowed to forget material conditions. Even the simple pleasure of comfort becomes political when comfort is withheld to maintain domination. A strange and telling detail appears in some plantation records and recollections. Certain enslaved artisans, such as blacksmiths, coopers, mill workers, and carpenters, could become so essential that owners boasted about their skill to visitors, as though excellence somehow reflected on the master rather than the person doing the work. You can almost hear the self-congratulation in it. Look what talent I possess. Not employ, possess. The logic is ugly and absurd, yet it reveals something important. Black skill was visible everywhere in the South, embedded in buildings, tools, crops, boats, kitchens, stables, and workshops, even as the system denied the rightful ownership of that skill. Mid-morning light sharpens. Dew burns away. Dust lifts from roads and hangs in thin sheets. The smell changes too. Less smoke now. More sun-warmed wood, crushed grass, animal sweat, and the iron tang of worked soil. The body begins to heat. Shirts cling. Hands toughen around handles worn smooth by years of use. Bending and straightening settle into a punishing rhythm. Backs burn. Knees complain. Necks ache from long angles of downward focus. There is no romance in agricultural labour when it is forced and intensified for someone else's profit. On some plantations, enslaved drivers supervise gangs of workers under the authority of white overseers or owners. Their position is painful and morally complex. They may share the suffering of the people they direct, while also being required to enforce pace and order. Historians still argue over the degree of agency drivers held and how much room existed for negotiation, slowing, shielding, or refusal within that role. The records rarely capture the full emotional truth. What they do show is tension, constant tension. Power distorted into layers, with each layer pressed against the next. In kitchens, the morning takes on another texture. Heat rises quickly from hearths, water sloshes into kettles, dough is mixed with sore wrists. Coffee may be ground for white households while those preparing it have no claim on comfort themselves. Grease pops. Knives thud against boards. Orders arrive in voices that expect instant obedience. Domestic workers learn to move efficiently in narrow spaces crowded with flame. Heavy pots and unpredictable tempers. Burns are common. So is fatigue. So is the insult of being trusted with everything practical and trusted with nothing human. And yet humour lives here too. Dry humour. Sideways humour. The kind that flickers across a face and vanishes before anyone dangerous can catch it. A glance exchanged over some pompous request. A muttered line so quiet it is nearly swallowed. Laughter, when it comes, is often brief and careful, but it matters. People do not survive on solemnity alone, even in oppression. Somebody notices that a rooster behaves like a landowner, or that a mule has more common sense than the men making rules. Gentle sarcasm has ancient roots. It turns out power has always been a little ridiculous. The fear of punishment sits underneath everything. It may not appear every hour, but it shapes every hour. Whipping, confinement, withheld food, sale, threats against family, and sudden violence remain part of the system. Some enslavers cultivate unpredictability because uncertainty itself is effective. Others rely on routines of surveillance and measured discipline. There is variety in method, not in purpose. The purpose is obedience. The purpose is extraction. The purpose is reminding human beings that they are expected to move as property, while never ceasing to know they are people. By midday, the sun can become oppressive, especially in the deep south. Light flattens the fields into blinding plains. Insects drone. Sweat crawls down the spine. The smell of hot earth grows thick and almost sweet. Water breaks, if given, are precious and short. A cup passed from hand to hand can feel like grace. Shade becomes a fantasy. Under such conditions, physical endurance is not just admirable, it is demanded to the point of cruelty. Many enslaved people live with chronic pain, untreated injuries, dental problems, fevers, and exhaustion that modern readers can barely imagine as normal. Yet normal it becomes, which may be the saddest trick oppressive systems ever perform. You notice how communication adapts under watch. A warning can be folded into an ordinary sentence. A change of tone can signal danger. News travels in fragments between plantations, through visits, markets, hired-out labour, boat landings, and church gatherings where possible. A person may know more than an owner suspects. That hidden knowledge matters. So does hidden planning. Not every act of resistance is dramatic. Slowed work, broken tools, feigned illness, secret literacy, preserved family ties, stolen moments of rest, and quiet refusals all belong to the landscape of daily resistance. Small acts, serious meaning. There is scholarly uncertainty around how often sabotage occurred versus how often owners simply blamed enslaved workers for ordinary accidents and crop failures. It is hard to measure because accusations were self-serving, and successful resistance was often meant to remain unseen. Still, the possibility haunted enslavers. They feared poison, arson, theft, flight, disobedience, and coordinated revolt, sometimes obsessively. This fear tells you something important. They knew, at some level, that the system required force because it had never earned consent. As evening approaches, people return from labour carrying the day in their bodies. Feet drag through dust. Hands are nicked, blistered, swollen, or stained. Clothing smells of field, kitchen, stable, or workshop. The descent of light brings some relief, but not complete rest. There may still be wood to chop, garments to mend, food to prepare, children to wash, pots to scrape, floors to sweep, babies to rock. The labour of maintaining life begins where the labour of exploitation pauses, not ends, pauses. What strikes you most is not only the hardship, though the hardship is immense. It is the discipline of endurance, the practiced gathering of self each morning, the decision, repeated in countless forms, to feed a child, protect a sibling, hold a marriage together, save a story, sing a line, finish a task, survive another day without surrendering the inward knowledge of one's own humanity. The system wants bodies, tries to flatten souls. It never quite succeeds. Night finally settles with frogs calling from wet ground and stars opening over the fields. Smoke rises again from cabin chimneys. Somewhere a spoon scrapes the bottom of a pot. Somewhere a mother hums to a restless child. Somewhere an old man rubs his hands and stares into embers, silent with fatigue. The day that has just passed was ordinary by the standards of 1860. That is exactly what makes it so heavy. Ordinary here means structured theft of time, labour, movement, comfort, and choice. And still, Inside that stolen day, people make room for care, wit, caution, memory, and the fierce plain fact of being alive. In northern cities and border towns, freedom begins with paperwork, rent, and caution rather than ease. You wake not to a plantation horn, but to the muffled clatter of wagons over cobblestones, the slap of early footsteps in a narrow alley, and the chill that creeps through thin window glass before sunrise. A stove ticks softly as it cools from the night. Coal smoke drifts in from a neighbouring chimney, somewhere below. A cartman calls to his horse with the hoarse patience of a man who has done this far too many mornings in a row. A free black household in 1860 may occupy a modest room above a shop, a small brick home in a crowded lane, a wooden dwelling near the edge of town, or a back building tucked behind wealthier streets that prefer not to notice it. The legal condition is different from slavery, but it is not equal citizenship. It is freedom fenced by law, custom, surveillance, and white opinion, which can turn hostile with remarkable speed. You're free to work, perhaps, free to pay taxes, certainly, free to be judged, excluded, and threatened. America was very inventive when it came to limited blessings. The bed is narrow, the washwater is cold, a coat is brushed and carefully preserved because replacing it would be costly. A woman braids a child's hair with quick, practiced fingers. A man knots his neckcloth before heading to a job that may underpay him despite his skill. A widow checks a small box where she keeps rent money, church dues, and a folded paper proving status, because in this era even freedom often feels like something that must be carried, shown, and defended. That proof matters. In many places, free black Americans live with the constant need to document themselves. Papers can mean the difference between going home and being seized. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 hangs over daily life like bad weather that never fully clears. It empowers officials and encourages bounty hunters to capture alleged fugitives, often with shocking disregard for evidence. A free black person in Philadelphia, New York, or Cincinnati may know that a stranger's accusation can spiral quickly into arrest. You step out the door with your legal condition in your pocket and your vulnerability in your bones. The street is waking now. Bakers open shutters. The smell of bread curls into the morning air and mixes with horse manure, damp stone, salt from nearby docks, and the medicinal tang of city refuse. Bells ring from church towers. A milk cart rattles past. On the waterfront, ropes creak against masts. On market streets, crates thump onto pavements. Free black life is woven into these urban rhythms. Sailors, stevedores, laundresses, porters, seamstresses, barbers, coachmen, cooks, teachers, preachers, cigar makers, waiters, and craftspeople move through the same city as everyone else. Though the city does not welcome them equally, work is often available in the hardest, lowest, or most narrowly defined occupations. A free black man may be deeply competent, reliable, and sober, yet still be shut out of skilled trades by white guilds or white workers who treat competition as contamination. A black woman may take in washing until her knuckles chap and split in winter, because domestic labour is one of the few employments open to her. The economy uses black labour eagerly while closing its doors with the other hand, a neat trick if one enjoys hypocrisy. Still, free black communities build lives with extraordinary discipline. That is one of the striking truths of 1860. They established churches, schools, debating societies, benevolent organizations, reading circles, temperance groups, burial associations, and aid networks. These institutions are practical, spiritual, and political all at once. A church basement may host prayer one evening, a school lesson the next afternoon, and a strategy meeting after dark. A mutual aid society may help cover funeral costs, support a sick family, or assist someone newly arrived in town. Respectability is often cultivated not from vanity, but from strategy. Dress well when you can. Keep accounts carefully. Educate your children. Present dignity so firmly that no insult can fully dislodge it. Yet respectability does not guarantee safety. A well-dressed black teacher can still be barred from a railway car. A businessman can still be denied service. A family can still be refused lodging. A child can still be shoved toward a separate bench or excluded from a classroom entirely. Northern racism in 1860 is often more polite in tone than slavery, but politeness is a flimsy moral achievement. Segregation appears in schools, churches, theatres, public conveyances, and even cemeteries. White Northerners may oppose slavery in theory while resisting black neighbours in practice. Liberty, it turns out, was frequently treated as a lovely abstraction until an actual black family moved next door. You feel the pressure most sharply in movement. To walk through town as a free black American is to navigate a map of unwritten warnings. Which street after dark? Which saloon to avoid? Which constable is less dangerous? Which boarding house asks too many questions? Which dock foreman hires fairly? Which district may erupt if political news goes bad? Social knowledge becomes as necessary here as on any plantation, though the threats take a different shape. Watchfulness is still a daily skill. In places like Baltimore, St. Louis, Louisville, and other border cities, the lines between slavery and freedom sit painfully close together. A free black person may pass enslaved people on the street, labour beside them, or have relatives whose status differs within the same extended family. Sale notices, jail notices, and labour notices exist in the same public world. A man can earn wages while his cousin cannot legally own his own time. A woman can arrange schooling for her child while her sister fears sail farther south. These mixed legal landscapes produce a particular emotional strain. Freedom is real, but it is uneven, conditional, and constantly reminded of its opposite. The domestic world reflects both ambition and pressure. Free black families strive to create stable homes in spite of low wages and high rents. Furniture may be sparse, but a room can still be orderly, warm, and proud. The smell of stew lingers in the evening. A Bible rests on a small table. A patched curtain softens the light at the window. Children recite letters or scripture. Neighbours borrow sugar, exchange gossip, and compare prices at market. You can feel the texture of striving in these rooms, not grand striving. Ordinary striving, the effort to make a life that holds shape against daily abrasion. A quirky and rather charming detail from the period comes from black mutual aid and parade culture in northern cities. Some organisations marked important days with uniforms, banners, music, and carefully choreographed public processions. These events were not frivolous decoration, they were declarations of presence. To march in polished boots behind a banner with your society's name stitched upon it was to insist that your community possessed order, memory, leadership, and pride. Also, to be honest, people have always understood the political usefulness of looking impressive in public. Education carries special weight. Many free black parents pursue schooling for their children with an intensity born of hard experience. Reading is not merely refinement, it is leverage. It opens access to scripture, newspapers, contracts, political arguments, and self-defense against fraud. In some cities, black children attend separate public schools. In others, they rely on church schools or privately organised classes. Teachers often work with limited materials, crowded rooms, and low pay. Chalk dust, rough benches, slates, recitation, patience. You can almost hear the lesson rising and falling in the room. Spell it again. Read that line once more. Hold the book carefully. Newspapers and public speaking also shape free black life. Black editors, lecturers, ministers, and activists help circulate political ideas across communities. A newspaper passed from one reader to another may be discussed for days. News of court decisions, speeches, anti-slavery meetings, violence in Kansas, or resistance to fugitive slave enforcement can animate whole neighborhoods. The spoken word matters just as much. In an era before instant communication, an eloquent speaker in a church hall can alter the emotional weather of a room. Hope can spread that way. So can warning. Women often stand at the centre of this community labour. They earn wages, manage households, organise church work, care for children, support schools, and sustain social networks that formal records too often undervalue. Historians continue to debate how visible women's political activity was in comparison with men's organisations, largely because male leadership received more written attention. But if you look closely at daily life, women appear everywhere, stitching communities together through labour that is practical, moral, and relentless. The nation loved to praise independence while leaning heavily on women whose names it then neglected to record properly. Another elegant little contradiction. The danger of kidnapping remains terrifyingly real. Criminal networks and opportunists sometimes seize free black people, especially children or those lacking strong local protection, and attempt to sell them into slavery. The possibility is not paranoid fantasy. It enters parenting, movement, and neighbourhood vigilance. A mother teaches a child what names to remember, which adults to trust, and what to do if grabbed. Neighbours watch one another's doors. Men accompany one another at night. Freedom in such a world requires community eyes. Religion offers structure and emotional grounding. In black churches you find not only worship but governance, instruction, mutual care, and public voice. The atmosphere can shift from solemn prayer to ringing song in a matter of moments. Wooden pews creak. Summer air moves through open windows. Perfume, lamp oil, damp wool, and hymn breath gather in the room. A sermon may address salvation, but it also addresses conduct, patience, injustice, self-worth, and the duties of collective life. Faith is not an escape from the world. It is one of the tools used to survive it. Not everyone in free black community agrees on strategy. Some advocate moral suasion and disciplined respectability. Some emphasise emigration, though that idea divides opinion sharply. Some press for immediate legal equality. Some focus on economic advancement and institutional building. Some distrust white reformers. Some work closely with them. Historians still argue over how unified black political thought really was is 1860 because surviving speeches often elevate prominent leaders rather than ordinary voices. But ordinary life suggests diversity. Communities debate, disagree, adapt, and continue. At street level, that complexity appears in small scenes. A barber listens quietly while white customers discuss national politics, gathering information while revealing little. A seamstress pauses at her window to watch a procession. A schoolboy carries books under one arm and keeps to the sunnier side of the street. A boarding house keeper asks careful questions before renting a room. A church elder counts coins twice before locking the box. None of it looks dramatic. All of it is history. As evening falls, city light changes from grey to amber. Lamps bloom in windows. Footsteps soften on side streets while tavern noise grows louder elsewhere. Supper smells drift through neighbourhoods. Fish frying, bread warming, onion, pepper, broth. In a modest room, a family buzz heads over a meal. In another, a lodger reads aloud from a newspaper while others mend clothes and listen. Outside, a patrolman passes with the stiff gait of someone convinced that authority itself is a personality. This is what life called free can look like in 1860. Waged labour without equal opportunity. Legal status without full legal protection. Home without complete security. Citizenship in aspiration, but not in national practice. And yet, within these limits, black Americans build institutions, educate children, guard one another, argue politics, worship deeply, and insist upon belonging in a republic that continually hesitates to admit them. The daily achievement is not merely survival, it is the creation of community under conditions designed to keep that community vulnerable. When the street finally quiets and the last cart rolls by, the room cools around you. A candle gutters low, cloth rustles as children settle under blankets. The city never becomes fully silent, but it dims enough for thought. In that softer hour, freedom feels both precious and unfinished. It is something held, defended, organised, and feared for all at once. A hard-won condition, a partial shelter, a life that must be built each day against the possibility of being denied by law, by violence, or by the prejudices of people who claim to love liberty in the abstract while resisting it in the flesh. Work begins with the body long before it earns a name. You feel it first in the hands, in the back, in the shoulders, in the feet that meet cold ground before dawn and hot dust by noon. In 1860, black labour is everywhere in American life, so common that much of the country has trained itself not to notice it properly. The road is graded by it, the meals are prepared by it, the cotton is picked by it, the barrels are shaped by it, the ships are loaded by it, the shirts are washed by it, the bricks are carried by it. The nation moves because black Americans move. Yet the nation speaks as if this motion were natural, automatic, almost ownerless, a very convenient blindness. In the plantation South, field labour remains the most familiar image, and for good reason. Cotton dominates vast stretches of the lower South, and cotton work consumes the day with a punishing consistency. You step into rows that seem to stretch past reason, the plants low and stubborn, the soil clinging to shoes and hems, hoeing, weeding, chopping, picking, hauling. The motions repeat until they become a kind of enforced rhythm. Fingers roughen, nails crack. Sun presses down so hard it feels physical, like another hand laid heavily across the neck. Dust settles in the mouth and turns the tongue thick. Yet black labour in 1860 is not only agricultural, and this matters. It matters because the fuller picture reveals how deeply black skill is embedded in the American economy. Enslaved and free black Americans work as blacksmiths, coopers, brickmakers, carpenters, boatmen, dock workers, hostlers, plasterers, iron workers, teamsters, shoemakers, laundresses, seamstresses, bakers, nurses, stable hands, chimney sweeps, tobacco processors, sailors, and mechanics. In towns and cities, they repair, build, haul, cook, clean, ferry, forge, sew, and serve. Many white Americans depend on black expertise while refusing to admit that dependence openly. The hypocrisy hums along like background machinery. You enter a blacksmith shop in the early morning and the air changes at once. Heat beats against your face. The smell is coal, iron, and sweat. Sparks leap in brief orange bursts. A hammer rings against metal with a sharp, disciplined rhythm that vibrates through the wrists and up the arm. An enslaved smith may shoe horses, mend wagon rims, shape hinges, or forge plantation tools essential to daily work. His labour is skilled, exact, and valuable. Everyone knows it. That does not mean he controls the product of his skill, the price of it, or often even the hours of his day. Talent flourishes under bondage, which tells you something grim about the system, and something powerful about the people surviving within it. On the docks, the work has another texture. Rope burns the palms, tar sticks to the skin. Salt air fills the lungs with a damp sharpness that never quite leaves your clothes. Barrels thump, crates scrape. Men shout over river noise and gull cries in cities like New Orleans, Baltimore, Charleston, and New York. Black labourers are integral to waterfront life. Some are enslaved, some free. some hired out by owners for wages partly or mostly taken from them, and some working in unstable arrangements that blur legal categories in practice, if not in law. The waterfront is noisy, crowded, and dangerous. It is also a place where information travels. Sailors bring news, dock workers overhear names, routes, prices, rumours, elections, and sometimes possibilities. Women's labour runs through every level of daily life. In fields, enslaved women perform back-breaking agricultural work beside men. In houses, kitchens, dairies, and wash yards, they prepare food, scrub floors, boil linens, nurse white children, mend garments, carry water, and keep households functioning from the shadows. Free black women in cities often labour as laundresses, domestic servants, cooks, market women, seamstresses, or boarding house keepers. The washday alone can feel like an entire world. Buckets slosh, soap stings the skin, steam rises from kettles, wet cloth grows surprisingly heavy, as if cotton resents being asked to move once saturated. Arms ache from wringing, knuckles chap. The smell is lye, damp fabric, sweat, and clean linen that took far too much effort to become clean. There is little glamour in domestic skill, though whole households collapse without it. A cook knows how long bread should rise by touch and weather. A laundress knows which stain yields to ash soap and which requires boiling. A seamstress can judge fabric quality with her fingertips in a second. A nursemaid can calm a crying child while stirring a pot and listening for footsteps in the hall. These are forms of intelligence. They are practical, embodied, and refined by repetition. Historians once gave more attention to public male labour than to household work, but scholars have increasingly emphasised how central women's labour was to both the economy and the maintenance of social order. The house did not merely sit beside history, it produced it. Hired out labour creates another layer of experience. In many southern towns, enslaved people are hired out to employers who pay the owner rather than the worker. A carpenter may travel to a building site, a woman may be hired as a cook or washer, a drayman may haul goods through crowded streets. In some cases, enslaved workers keep a small portion of earnings. In others, they do not. The arrangement can mean slightly more movement through public space, contact with more people, and occasionally small opportunities to negotiate time or save money. It can also mean intensified instability, harsher discipline, and the constant anxiety of being evaluated as income. Even partial flexibility remains nested inside ownership. The chain is not absent simply because it is longer. You also notice the seasonal character of labour. Cotton picking season demands speed and endurance under pressure. Tobacco requires careful handling at different stages. Rice cultivation involves intricate environmental knowledge of flooding, drainage, and timing. Sugar work, especially during grinding season, is notorious for relentless schedules and dangerous machinery. This is where the body becomes a calendar. Planting, tending, harvesting, curing, pressing, hauling. The year enters muscle memory. Your hands know the month before your mind names it. A quirky detail from the era lingers in urban service work. Black barbers in some northern and southern cities became highly respected for their craft, and often served white clientele almost exclusively. Barbershops could become lively spaces of gossip, politics, and performance, with razors stropped carefully, towels steamed, mirrors polished, and conversation managed like a second profession. There is something almost absurd in the arrangement. A black barber might stand inches from the throat of a powerful white man every day, trusted with a razor, yet denied basic civic equality. History does occasionally resemble a satire written too broadly to be believable. For enslaved artisans, skill can cut two ways. A talented carpenter or mechanic may receive marginally better rations, clothing, or status than a field hand because his labour is profitable and hard to replace. He may travel with jobs. He may hear more news. He may be allowed access to tools that others are denied. Yet this same skill can make him more marketable and thus more vulnerable to sale. Excellence does not guarantee security. In slave markets, skill is itemized. Age, health, trade, temperament, human worth translated into commercial language with horrifying calm. A gifted craftsperson can be praised and priced in the same breath. In free black communities, work is tied closely to respectability and independence, but the path is steep. White employers may confine black workers to menial roles regardless of ability. White unions and trade groups often exclude them. Competition for jobs can sharpen racial resentment, especially in port cities where immigrant labour and black labour meet under hard economic conditions. A free black carpenter may know the craft thoroughly and still lose contracts to lesser men whose main qualification is whiteness. Merit, that favourite word of self-congratulating societies, turns out to have many hidden conditions. Still, entrepreneurship emerges where it can. Some free black Americans run catering businesses, boarding houses, dressmaking shops, livery services, groceries, or small retail ventures. A successful business requires credit, trust, supply access, and clientele, all difficult to secure in a prejudiced market, yet such businesses become anchors of community life. The boarding house keeper offers more than a room. She offers news, referrals, protection, and introductions. The caterer provides not only food but a reputation that travels. The shopkeeper extends credit carefully, balancing mercy with survival. Economic life becomes communal strategy. Labour also shapes posture and health in lasting ways. You can read a lifetime of work in the body, the swollen joints of an older field hand, the burn marks on a cook's forearms, the stoop of a woman who has carried water for decades, the calluses on a boatman's hands, the cough of a man who has inhaled dust, smoke, or lint too long. Medical care is inconsistent and often cruelly inadequate. Enslaved workers may be treated only to protect economic value. Free workers may simply lack access or money. Pain becomes ordinary. So does working through it. The smell of labour changes by place. In tobacco warehouses it is sweet, dry, and leaf-heavy. In stables it is hay, manure, leather, and warm animal breath. In kitchens it is yeast, onion, ash, and grease. In fields it is green stalks, wet earth, and sweat turning sour under heat. In carpentry yards it's fresh pine and sawdust settling on skin like powder. History lives in smells more than textbooks admit. A nation built by labour always has a scent. Children observe work constantly and begin learning it early. Even when not fully employed, they watch adults stitch, plane, season food, mend harness, stack wood, and gauge weather. Knowledge passes through demonstration. Hold it like this. Not that way. Keep your thumb clear. Listen to the boil. Test the edge. Lift with your legs. Many young people develop sophisticated practical skills by adolescence. Though the circumstances of learning are often harsh, capability grows where childhood should have had more room to wander. There is also the question of stolen time. After assigned labour ends, personal labour begins. Gardens tended in scraps of evening light, chickens fed, clothing patched, shoes repaired, herbs gathered, traps checked, a chair fixed, a basket woven. Food prepared for one's own family after preparing it all day for others. This, after labour, matters deeply. It is where fragments of autonomy survive. A garden plot can mean flavour, nutrition, trade, pride. A repaired coat can mean warmth and self-respect. A hand-carved object can be useful, beautiful, or both. Exhaustion does not erase the desire to shape something for oneself. Scholars still debate the exact degree to which enslaved workers could leverage specialised skills into improved conditions or informal bargaining power. The evidence varies by region, owner, and trade. Some artisans appear to have negotiated limited privileges. Others remained under strict control despite obvious value. The uncertainty itself is revealing. Power under slavery was unstable, personal, and inconsistent, which meant conditions could shift quickly with inheritance, debt, migration, or the temper of a single owner. Nothing secure was truly secure. The emotional life of work deserves attention too. Pride can coexist with exploitation. A man may take real satisfaction in a well-built wagon wheel, while hating the system that claims his hands. A woman may season a meal beautifully and still feel the insult of serving those who deny her dignity. A boatman may love the river and resent the terms of his labour upon it. Human feeling rarely obeys neat categories. People do not stop caring about excellence simply because the world is unjust. Sometimes excellence becomes one of the few available assertions of self. By late afternoon, work sites acquire a tired glow. The heat loosens slightly. Shadows lengthen across yards, docks, and fields. Tools are gathered. Horses are rubbed down. Fires are banked or stirred for evening use. The body grows heavy in that familiar way, as though every limb has absorbed the day and does not wish to carry 1 ounce more. Yet even in fatigue, small judgments continue. Count the wages, hide the coins, save the scraps, sharpen the blade for morning. Remember who owes what. Ask who is hiring. Listen for news. This is the true spread of black labour in 1860. Not a single role, but an entire working world. The nation's economy rests upon it in plain sight, from plantation wealth to urban convenience, from export profits to household comfort. Black Americans are not standing at the margins of economic life. They are central to it. Their labour is skilled, adaptive, varied, and indispensable. The tragedy is that indispensability brings neither justice nor protection on its own. When evening settles and the tools finally go quiet, the sounds soften into smaller ones. Water poured into a basin, a whetstone used once more before dark, a pot lid set in place, boots left by a door, someone rolling sore shoulders with a wince. In that tired hour, work no longer looks like an abstract category. It feels intimate, physical, and close to the skin. It is what the body has done, what the body has borne, what the body, somehow, will do again when morning returns. Home is not always a full house with a solid door and a quiet hearth. In 1860, home for black Americans can be a cabin with smoke trapped low under the rafters, a rented room up a narrow stair, a shared yard behind a city lane, or a corner of space made private by habit rather than architecture. Yet the feeling of home still gathers there. You sense it in the way a blanket is folded, in the way food is stretched to include one more person, in the way a child is washed and tucked in with care even when the day has left everyone exhausted. The evening air cools slowly. Dust settles outside. Inside. The room holds the smells of supper, damp cloth, pine smoke, and tired bodies. A pot simmers low if there is enough to simmer. Cornmeal, greens, beans, salt pork, fish, onions, whatever can be had. The meal may be plain, but the act of sharing it matters. Bowls pass from hand to hand, a spoon scrapes the bottom, a child asks for more in a hopeful voice that everyone hears. Someone smiles anyway. Someone makes a joke to keep the room from growing too heavy. This is not abundance. It is maintenance of the spirit. For enslaved families, domestic life exists under direct threat. A husband and wife may consider themselves fully married in faith, affection, and community recognition, while the law treats their bond as invisible. Children belong emotionally to their parents and legally to the enslaver. A mother teaches manners, tenderness, caution, and prayer while knowing that no lesson can protect a child from sale. A father repairs a stool, comforts a fevered son, and listens for footsteps outside. Because the private world he's trying to build can be broken by a public transaction. Few things reveal the cruelty of slavery more clearly than this attack on ordinary family certainty. Still, family forms itself stubbornly. Kinship extends beyond blood. An older woman in the next cabin becomes an aunt in practice. A man who is not a child's father may still teach him how to hold a knife safely or braid a fishing line. Women share childcare, recipes, herbs, and warnings. Men exchange skills, tools, and scraps of news. Grandparents tell stories in low evening voices. The web of relation becomes wider because it must. When formal protection is absent, people create belonging through repeated acts of care. The touch of domestic life is everywhere. A child's warm cheek after sleep, a rough hand smoothing a torn sleeve, the weight of a baby passed from one adult to another, the sting of wash water on cracked skin, the softness of a treasured cloth saved for special days. These details matter because they restore scale. History often speaks in laws and elections, but life is carried through hands. Through feeding, mending, holding, combing, scrubbing, braiding, rocking, the body remembers kindness with as much force as it remembers pain. In free black households, the pressures are different, though hardly absent. Rent must be paid, food prices watched, work found and kept, clothing maintained carefully because appearances can affect employment, respect, and treatment in public. A room may be crowded, with boarders sleeping nearby to help cover costs. Privacy is thin, walls are thinner, yet a family can still mark out a moral space of its own. The table is set as neatly as possible. Children are expected to speak properly. Shoes are polished for Sunday, a Bible, hymn book, or school primer sits where it can be reached. Order becomes a statement, not perfect order, of course. Real households are noisy. A toddler spills, someone loses a button, someone forgets to bring in the wash. Civilization survives. Children fill these homes with movement. They chase each other around stools. They whisper after being told to settle down. They invent games with almost nothing. A hoop, a stick, a rag ball, a carved toy, a song with clapped rhythm. Even in hard settings, childhood insists on itself. That insistence can be joyful and heartbreaking at once. A child laughs with complete abandon, then falls silent when an adult enters with news in a changed face. Play and fear live uncomfortably close together. Naming also matters more than records often show. Families preserve names carefully, sometimes repeating them across generations, sometimes holding on to a surname informally, sometimes carrying a name from a father, mother, grandparent, or admired figure. A name can be memory, claim, resistance, affection. Under slavery, where records reduce people to inventory, the spoken family name becomes deeply important. You are who your people call you. You belong somewhere. Even if the courthouse refuses to write it properly, courtship and marriage take shape under pressure too. Young people still dress carefully for gatherings. They still notice one another's smile, voice, walk, wit. A man may visit in the evening after labour, hat in hand, trying to be respectful while everyone in the room listens more than he wishes. A woman may tease him lightly before answering any serious question. Affection does not disappear in a hard world. It becomes more deliberate. Under slavery, courtship may be constrained by distance between plantations, owner permission, travel passes, and the constant fear of future sale. Among free black communities, marriage can be legally recognised in some places, though equality before the law remains incomplete. In both settings, choosing a partner is also choosing a companion for endurance. A curious detail from the period appears in household decoration. Even very modest homes sometimes displayed small tokens of beauty with striking care. Shells on a shelf, a bright cloth, a framed print if one could be obtained, dried flowers, polished gourds, or ceramics saved from breakage. These objects were not trivial. They announced taste, self-possession, and the refusal to live as though comfort or beauty belonged only to the powerful. Human beings will decorate a corner of hardship if given half a chance. It may be one of our better habits. Food is one of the richest parts of home life. though it is shaped by scarcity. Enslaved households may supplement rations through gardens, fishing, trapping, foraging or informal trade, sweet potatoes, greens, peas, corn, okra, herbs. In urban homes, purchases must be stretched cleverly. The kitchen becomes a place of invention. Bones become broth. Leftovers become tomorrow's meal. Flour is guarded. Salt is valued. Flavour is built patiently from small means. A great deal of American food history rests in these acts of adaptation, care, and memory. Though the country later liked to enjoy the results without honouring the people who preserved them, a familiar pattern, sadly. Women often bear the heaviest domestic load, but men participate too, especially where necessity leaves no room for rigid ideals. Men chop wood, fetch water, mend tools, garden, carry children, patch roofs, and protect household boundaries in whatever ways they can. Under slavery, the ability to provide materially is often damaged by forced labour and lack of control, yet emotional and practical fatherhood still matters deeply. Historians continue to discuss how slavery reshaped gender roles within black families, because the evidence shows both disruption and resilience. What is clear is that family authority and care had to be negotiated under unnatural conditions, with dignity improvised rather than guaranteed. Religion often enters the home in quiet forms: a prayer before eating, a whispered blessing over a child, a Bible verse remembered from church, a spiritual hummed while sweeping the floor. Not every household is solemn. Some are lively, teasing, full of argument and laughter. But even in the more playful ones, moments of reverence appear. The room dims, heads bow. A voice asks for protection through another night. The intimacy of home worship can feel different from public church life, more fragile, more immediate, less polished, more necessary. Illness changes the whole atmosphere of a household. A cough that does not stop, a feverish forehead, a child breathing too fast. Medical help may be distant, unaffordable, or untrustworthy. So care often falls to family knowledge: herbs, poultices, teas, broths, cool cloths, patience, prayer, and watching through the night, the smell of sickness, vinegar, sweat, wet linen, stale air can settle over a room and make time itself feel slower. In such moments, home becomes a ward, and love becomes labour without sleep. Funeral customs and mourning also reveal the importance of domestic bonds. When death comes, families and neighbours gather not only to grieve but to uphold dignity. Clothing is arranged, songs are sung, food is shared with mourners, stories are told. In free communities, benevolent societies sometimes help with burial costs. Under slavery, burial may be hurried or constrained, yet memory still enlarges the person beyond the grave. People remember how someone laughed, cooked, braided hair, sang, argued, worked, walked, prayed. The dead remain in the household through story long after the body is gone. Not all homes are calm. Strain can sharpen tempers. Hunger can make people abrupt. Crowding can lead to quarrels. Grief can sour into silence. A boarding house room with too many people and too little money may feel one insult away from shouting. A cabin, after a day of forced labour, may hold more exhaustion than tenderness. The point is not to paint domestic life as saintly. It is human life, compressed by pressure. People lose patience. Children sulk. Adults disagree. Someone slams a cup down too hard. Then, often, someone else softens first. There is scholarly uncertainty around how much privacy enslaved families could reliably maintain within plantation layouts, since cabin placement, surveillance, and owner interference varied widely. Some historians emphasize the creation of relatively autonomous domestic spaces during evening hours, while others stress how deeply intrusion shaped even the most ordinary moments. Both views hold truth. What matters in lived terms is that privacy was rarely complete and always precious. A closed door, a few quiet minutes, a conversation unheard, these could feel luxurious. Night routines settle over the household gradually. Clothes are shaken out and hung. Children are wiped down and coaxed towards sleep. Hair is combed by firelight. A pot is covered for morning. Someone rubs lard or salve into chapped hands. Someone checks the embers. The sounds grow smaller. A murmur near the bed. A spoon set aside. A sigh from tired lungs. Outside, insects start their steady music, and the darkness presses softly at the walls. What makes these homes remarkable is not comfort. Though comfort exists in flashes, it is intention. Black Americans in 1860 create family life under conditions that work against permanence, safety, and rest. They teach children how to behave, how to remember, how to notice danger, how to pray, how to laugh, how to share. They maintain standards where they can. They claim one another publicly and privately. They cook, mend, soothe, discipline, grieve, celebrate, and continue. The household becomes a workshop of endurance and affection. By the time the last voice fades and the room finally quiets, the meaning of home feels almost tangible. It is not simply shelter. It is a place where identity is spoken aloud and confirmed. A place where one person says another's name with love. A place where a child is told who their people are. A place where hunger is divided fairly. Where stories carry memory. Where beauty is made from scraps. And where tenderness survives despite every force arranged against it. In that soft darkness, with smoke thinning and breathing slowing, home becomes one of the clearest proofs that human dignity can be pressured, threatened, and wounded, yet still carefully kept alive. Faith enters the day quietly at first. A woman hums while sweeping the floor. An old man bows his head before eating. A child repeats a line of scripture, half from memory and half from trust. In 1860, for many Black Americans, religion is not a separate compartment of life set aside for neat Sunday use. It moves through ordinary hours like breath through the body. It steadies work, softens grief, organizes community, and gives language to feelings too large or dangerous to speak plainly. You begin in a churchyard on a warm evening when the light is turning amber at the edges. The ground smells of dust and summer grass. Shoes scuff the path. Wooden steps creak under steady feet. Women adjust shawls and bonnets. Men brush sleeves and lower their voices before stepping inside. Children fidget until a glance stills them. The building itself may be plain, whitewashed or weathered, with benches polished more by use than by varnish. Yet the room changes as it fills. Heat gathers, breath gathers, expectation gathers. In free Black communities, the church is often the strongest institution people can build and claim. It is a place of worship, certainly, but also of leadership, mutual aid, education, debate, courtship, charity, and political thought. Ministers speak from pulpits, but deacons count funds. Women organize support. Teachers guide children. Singers lead response, and neighbours keep one another informed. The church is not merely a spiritual shelter. It is a civic centre, a schoolroom, a relief office, and sometimes the nearest thing to public power a Black community can hold with its own hands. The sounds inside are layered and intimate. A bench shifts, a baby fusses, someone clears a throat. Then a hymn rises, not perfectly polished, but full and warm. Voices meet one another in the rafters. Some sing firmly, some tremble into the notes, some carry the melody while others circle around it with harmonies learned by ear. You feel the sound in the chest as much as hear it. The room becomes its own instrument. In such moments, music is not decorative, it is binding among enslaved people. Religious life takes many forms. Some attend services controlled or monitored by white clergy or owners, where obedience is emphasized and selected passages of scripture are used to defend the existing order. Others gather in more independent ways, in quarters, brush arbours, cabins, clearings, and prayer meetings shaped by black voices and black experience. These gatherings can be deeply emotional, deeply communal, and deeply meaningful. They also carry risk. White authorities often fear religious meetings they cannot supervise, especially when they involve large groups, night gatherings, or literate preachers beyond white control. Power dislikes mystery when the mystery belongs to the oppressed. The style of worship varies by place, denomination, and circumstance. Some congregations are measured and formal, with printed hymns, orderly prayer, and sermons of careful structure. Others are more participatory, with call and response, shouted affirmation, repeated refrains, clapping, and movement. Neither style is more real than the other. Both can hold enormous feeling. A quiet prayer spoken with lowered eyes can be as powerful as a ringing chorus that shakes the boards. Faith does not always arrive in the same clothing. Music carries special force because it can hold several meanings at once. A spiritual may offer comfort, biblical imagery, sorrow, longing, humour, or coded resonance depending on who is singing and who is listening. White observers in the period often noticed the beauty of black singing without understanding its full emotional or social depth. They heard melody and perhaps sadness. They missed endurance, theology, memory, and strategy folded into the same lines. Underestimation again becomes a strange ally. People reveal much when listeners assume they are hearing little. The sensory life of worship stays with you. The smell of lamp oil and wool, the press of warm air in a crowded room, the roughness of a wooden pew against the palm, the slight stick of summer humidity at the collar, a hand clasped tightly during prayer, a kerchief raised to wipe tears. Religion in this world is not abstract. It is physical, collective, and close to the skin. It is experienced through knees bent on bare floorboards and through lungs filling deeply before song. For Black Americans in 1860, biblical stories often carry intensely personal meaning. Exodus, deliverance, judgment, exile, suffering, promised land. These are not distant stories from a decorative past. They are frameworks for survival. A sermon on Pharaoh does not need much explanation in a slave society. A line about crossing over can stir a room in ways no outsider fully measures. Historians still debate exactly how often particular songs and scriptures carried coded references to escape or resistance, because evidence is uneven and later interpretation sometimes romanticized what was more fluid. But there is no doubt that biblical language helped people describe oppression, hope, and moral worth in ways the surrounding society denied. Prayer meetings can be especially intimate. They may happen after labour, when bodies are already tired and the room is lit by weak candlelight. A few people gather first, then more arrive. Someone begins softly. Another answers. The tone deepens. Requests are named. A sick child. A husband travelling. A daughter hired out. A brother in danger. A woman grieving. A man trying to hold steady under humiliation. Prayer becomes a place where hidden burdens are spoken aloud in trusted company. That alone has power to say the weight, to have others hear it, to be held by more than one heart. Women are central to this world in ways formal records only partly capture. They lead singing, organize meetings, sustain household devotion, guide children in scripture, tend the sick, fundraise, exhort, testify, and maintain the practical life of congregations. Some also preach informally, or exercise spiritual authority that exceeds the titles permitted to them. Scholars continue to discuss how fully women's leadership was recognized within various black churches before the war. Since male-authored records often highlight ministers and public officers, yet lived religion reveals women everywhere. They are often the ones who keep the flame from going out when the institution itself grows tired. Music outside formal worship matters too. Songs are sung while working, washing, rocking children, walking roads, or resting at day's end. A lullaby can carry faith. A field song can carry rhythm and longing. A funeral song can carry both grief and doctrine. Music moves through the household as naturally as cooking smoke. It teaches memory. It gives sorrow a shape. It makes loneliness less complete. In a world where written record is often inaccessible or unsafe, song becomes an archive that breathes. A curious and lovely detail from the period is the importance of lining out hymns in congregations where books are scarce or literacy uneven. One person gives a line, and the group follows, stretching the words into melody together. This method creates a deeply communal sound, slow and full, as if the room is thinking aloud in harmony. It also means that participation is not restricted to those holding printed text. You do not need a book in your hand to belong to the song. That feels significant. And not only musically, religion can also be a site of tension. White ministers sometimes preach submission, and some enslaved listeners must sit through these messages while drawing strength from entirely different parts of the service. In mixed settings, black worshippers may be segregated to galleries or side areas, expected to be present but not fully equal. In northern cities, black congregations may split over class, style, denomination, or leadership disputes. Respectable people disagree. Devout people quarrel. Churches, being made of humans, remain stubbornly human. Even so, faith often creates moral language for resistance and dignity. To believe that every soul answers to God is to challenge, even quietly, a system that treats some souls as property. To believe that suffering is seen by heaven is to refuse the lie that humiliation defines a person's full worth. To believe in divine justice is to look at earthly injustice with a different set of eyes. This does not always produce direct rebellion. Sometimes it produces patience, steadiness, charity, discipline, or endurance. But even endurance can be morally defiant when the world expects inward collapse. Revival meetings add another layer. These gatherings can draw large numbers, bring heightened emotion, and blur the boundary between worship and social event. People arrive in better clothes when they have them. There is excitement in the air. Food may be shared outside. News passes between families. Young people notice one another. Older people compare health, kin, and weather. Then the service swells. Singing grows louder. Testimony grows freer. Tears come easily. The emotional release is real because the burdens are real. The body that must stay controlled all week may finally tremble openly here. Funerals reveal perhaps the deepest union of music and faith. Death in black communities is never just private sorrow. It is communal reckoning, remembrance, and insistence on dignity. Songs are chosen carefully. Prayers gather around the bereaved. The dead are spoken of not as inventory, not as labour units, not as social problems, but as beloved persons. A mother is remembered for kindness, a father for steadiness, a child for laughter, a singer for her voice, a neighbour for generosity. Religion here restores personhood publicly against a society that repeatedly assaults it. There is also room for humour. A church mother may correct a young man's collar with such authority that he thanks her while pretending he had dressed that way on purpose. A preacher may gently mock vanity, laziness, or pretension to the delight of the room. Congregations laugh. They know the types: the proud brother, the distracted child, the long-winded elder who prays as if he has rented extra time. Sacred life does not exclude warmth. In fact, warmth may be part of how sacred life becomes bearable. Outside the church, night air cools the skin after a crowded service. Crickets take up the edges of sound again. A horse snorts near a hitching rail. Lantern light wavers over faces as people drift into small clusters before heading home. Conversations continue in low tones. Someone hums the final hymn while walking. Someone repeats a line from the sermon. Someone carries leftovers wrapped in cloth. Faith does not stay in the building. It travels back through lanes, streets, fields, and doorways. And for enslaved people especially, there can be spiritual practices not fully visible to the white world, prayer in secret, songs sung differently in private than in public, meanings attached to scripture through shared experience rather than formal theology. Historians remain careful here because evidence is partial and sometimes filtered through hostile observers or later memory. But enough survives to show a richly creative religious life, one that joined African continuities, Protestant Christianity, local circumstance, and personal need into something distinctively black and distinctly American. By the time the house is quiet and the last embers settle, faith is still present. It is in the blessing murmured over sleeping children, in the spiritual almost too soft to hear, in the verse recalled while pain throbs in old joints, in the whispered request for one more day of protection, one more day of courage, one more day with loved ones near. Religion and music in 1860 are not escapes from reality. They are ways of facing reality without surrendering the inner self to it. So when you listen closely to Black life in this year, you hear more than hardship. You hear a people interpreting the world through song, scripture, prayer, and shared feeling. You hear sorrow given melody so it does not drown the singer. You hear hope disciplined into ritual so it does not float away. You hear community making itself audible, and in that sound, warm and trembling in the dark, you hear one of the clearest forms of survival ever made by human beings who were told, over and over, that they were meant only to serve and disappear. You feel the eyes before you see them. That is how power often works in 1860. It arrives as a presence in the nerves first, a tightening across the shoulders, a quick calculation in the mind, a slight adjustment in the way a person walks, stands, or speaks. For Black Americans, whether enslaved or free, daily life unfolds under layers of watching. Some of it is formal and written into law, some of it is casual and social, some of it is violent and immediate. All of it teaches the same lesson. Someone is always claiming the right to inspect your movement. In the slave South, surveillance begins with space itself. The plantation is arranged to be seen. Fields are open, paths are known, work gangs are counted, cabins may sit in rows that make nighttime movement easier to notice. The big house, overseer's house, yard, road, and quarters form a geography of unequal visibility. White people can appear almost anywhere. Enslaved people are expected to account for where they are, why they are there, and how long they remain. Even stillness can seem suspicious. Even walking with too much purpose can draw questions. Passes become part of this world, a scrap of paper, a few written lines, a stated destination, a time limit. In some areas, an enslaved person moving off plantation property after dark, or even by day without permission, risks being stopped by patrols, questioned, whipped, jailed, or worse. You can feel the insult inside the procedure. A grown man carrying written proof that he may travel 3 miles to deliver a message. A woman needing permission to visit a husband on another farm. Human movement reduced to temporary paperwork. Revocable by anyone with greater power and a bad temper. Night patrols are one of the most feared parts of this system. Mounted men or local white patrols ride roads, inspect cabins, question black travellers, and enforce slave codes with broad discretion. The night itself changes under such conditions. Moonlight becomes dangerous because it reveals. Darkness becomes dangerous because it hides. Hoofbeats on a distant road can stiffen an entire room. A dog barking after midnight can pull people from sleep at once. The air outside may smell sweet with pine, wet earth, and night-blooming plants, yet fear travels through it faster than scent. Punishment stands behind surveillance like a shadow behind a door. Not every hour brings violence, but the possibility of it shapes every hour. Whipping is the most familiar image. But punishment can also mean confinement, stocks, sale, extra labour, deprivation, verbal humiliation, separation from family, or threats designed to terrify without leaving obvious marks. White power in 1860 often prefers flexibility. That is part of what makes it so effective. It can be loud or quiet, theatrical or administrative, public or domestic. The point is not only pain, the point is obedience. On small farms, the pressure can feel especially intimate. There may be no overseer because the owner watches personally, no crowd to disappear into, no large quarters to soften isolation. The master, mistress, sons, daughters, and neighbours all become part of the field of scrutiny. Who spoke too boldly, who moved too slowly, who looked away, who laughed at the wrong moment. It is astonishing how much fragility power can display while calling itself authority. A whole social order built on watching whether someone paused too long at a gate. Inside households, domestic workers face their own forms of surveillance. A cook is judged on timing, flavour, neatness, and obedience all at once. A nursemaid is watched for tone as much as task. A house servant may be expected to move quietly, anticipate needs, and remain emotionally unreadable. Too cheerful can seem impertinent. Too serious can seem resentful. Too tired can seem lazy. The performance demanded is exhausting because it requires not only labour, but constant management of expression. The face becomes part of the work uniform. Free black Americans are not exempt from this culture of watching. In northern cities, they may not face slave patrols, but they still encounter police scrutiny, hostile neighbours, racial profiling, exclusion from public accommodations, and the ever-present danger of accusation. A free black man walking alone at night may be stopped for no reason beyond existence. A black woman entering a store may be observed as if she has arrived to steal rather than shop. Children learn quickly which streets invite taunts, which public conveyances humiliate, and which white faces signal trouble. Freedom without privacy remains a bruised kind of freedom. The law gives much of this watching its structure. Slave codes regulate assembly, literacy, travel, weapons, trade, and behaviour in many southern states. Local ordinances differ, but the broad intention is unmistakable. Black mobility is treated as a problem to be contained. Black communication is treated as a risk to be interrupted. Black self-defense is treated as a threat to public order. The law does not merely punish acts. It organizes suspicion in advance. You can feel this most clearly in the body language such systems produce. A person knocks in a certain way, pauses before answering, lowers the gaze without necessarily lowering the mind, keeps hands visible, measures words carefully, chooses silence where honesty would be dangerous. These gestures are often misread later as passivity, when in fact they are highly developed techniques of survival. Historians have spent a great deal of time trying to understand how fear shaped enslaved behaviour, and one major debate turns on this very point. Did the omnipresence of violence control people, mainly through actual punishment, or through the anticipation of punishment? The evidence suggests both mattered deeply. Fear could become ambient, woven into daily judgment before any blow was struck. There are, of course, public spectacles of discipline meant to instruct others, an enslaved person punished before a group, a jail visible from a town street, notices posted describing runaways with chilling detail, advertisements that list scars, gait, complexion, skills, and marks on the body as though cataloguing livestock. These notices reveal more than owners intended. They show how often people resisted. They show how carefully the white world studied black bodies for purposes of control. They show the bureaucratic face of cruelty, neat handwriting placed over shattered lives. A strange detail of the era lies in the sheer number of ordinary white men who could temporarily acquire authority through patrol service, local enforcement, or crowd action. This meant surveillance was not limited to elite owners. It could be performed by middling farmers, clerks, mechanics, and self-appointed guardians of racial order. Power became social participation. One does not need great wealth to enjoy monitoring someone else. Apparently, one only needs a system generous enough to reward pettiness. In towns and cities, jails play a grim role. Enslaved people accused of disobedience, flight, or rule-breaking may be confined there until claimed or punished. Free black people may also be detained under flimsy grounds, especially where kidnapping networks and corrupt officials overlap. The jail is not simply a place of confinement, it is a warning built into the urban landscape. Thick walls, iron bars, sour air, the smell of damp stone, waste, and old straw. Even passing such a building can have meaning for those who know how easily law can become capture. Black Americans respond to this world of watching with their own arts of reading. They learn patrol routes, recognize which constable drinks too much, notice when a road is unusually quiet, understand how far sound carries on cold nights, read the difference between a bluff and a true threat, warn one another in coded or indirect ways, keep track of tempers, build routes of caution through hostile terrain. There is intelligence in this, serious intelligence, though the society around them insists on calling them inferior. Surveillance produces counter-surveillance. The watched become expert observers. Children absorb these lessons almost by osmosis. Do not linger there. Come straight home. Say yes, sir, and keep moving. Do not answer back in the street. Stay where Mrs. So-and-so can see you. Remember your paper. Do not run if called. It is painful to imagine how early these instructions begin, and how natural they can start to sound within families forced to teach them. Childhood becomes a schooling in risk management. Women face particular vulnerabilities under systems of policing and punishment. Their movement may be constrained by both racial and gendered scrutiny. They risk physical violence, sexual coercion, accusations of insolence, and interference with family life. A woman travelling to market, to church, or to visit kin may need to plan not only distance and time, but the temperaments of the men who might stop her. Her labour may be watched at close range in houses and yards. Her body may never fully be left alone. Scholars continue to examine how gender shaped the enforcement of slavery, especially because records kept by white men often flatten women's experiences into the background. But the background, when you look closely, is full of fear and calculation, and yet, even here, there are moments of refusal. A stare held 1 second longer than expected, a meeting arranged despite restrictions, a warning passed quietly down a road, a child taught the truth behind the rules, a family choosing to gather, sing, or pray, despite the knowledge that even joy can be considered suspicious. Resistance is not always a grand dramatic scene. Sometimes it is simply the refusal to let surveillance define the entire inner self. For free black communities, policing often intersects with politics. During times of election tension, riot, labour competition, or fugitive slave enforcement, surveillance intensifies. White mobs may claim to be preserving order, while in fact generating terror. Neighbourhoods can become exposed overnight. Doors are bolted earlier. Windows watched. Men escort one another. Women keep children indoors. The sound of a crowd in the distance changes the atmosphere of a whole street. You can smell smoke before you know whether it is a hearth fire or something much worse. One scholarly uncertainty worth noting concerns just how uniformly terror functioned from place to place. Historians differ because the documentary record is uneven, and because local practice varied widely. Some areas relied more on routine monitoring and legal constraints. Others saw sharper bursts of spectacular violence. Some owners were obsessively intrusive, others delegated discipline more loosely. But variation should never be mistaken for safety. In every version, black life is lived under the knowledge that white power can enter, question, stop, strike, confine, or separate with very little warning. This constant pressure leaves traces in sound. The pause before an answer, the lowered volume at night, the quick hush when hoofbeats pass, the careful knock that identifies a friend rather than danger, the breath held when papers are examined, the relief in a room when footsteps move on. A society of surveillance develops its own music, and it is made largely of interrupted human ease. Still, human beings remain more than the pressure placed upon them. That fact matters. The system wants predictability, it wants bowed heads, quick compliance, and inward resignation. What it receives instead are people who adapt, endure, observe, protect, warn, and cultivate private lives of thought and feeling beyond the reach of patrols and codes. Fear's real, so is skill, so is dignity carried under strain. As the evening deepens, doors close one by one, lamps dim, children are brought inside, somewhere down the road, a horse passes at measured pace, and every listening ear judges whether it will stop. Somewhere in town, a constable asks for papers. Somewhere a mother waits for a son delayed too long. Somewhere a man lies awake rehearsing answers to questions he hopes will not come. The whole landscape seems to listen with him. What daily policing reveals most clearly is this: slavery and racial domination do not survive by force alone, nor by law alone, nor by custom alone. They survive by embedding themselves into motion, timing, distance, posture, and expectation. They try to make power feel omnipresent, but even under that pressure, Black Americans continue to build hidden margins of selfhood. A joke kept private, a prayer whispered unobserved, a plan carried silently, a warning understood at once. These are small victories, perhaps, yet in a world determined to inspect and command every movement, the guarded interior life becomes one of the greatest victories of all. Learning begins in whispers, glances, and memory long before it reaches a page. In 1860, knowledge for Black Americans is never merely academic. It is practical, spiritual, social, and often dangerous. You feel its value in the way a person leans closer to hear a newspaper read aloud, in the way a mother repeats a name so a child will not forget it, in the way a man traces letters secretly with one finger on his knee, as if the shape itself might open a locked door. For enslaved people, reading and writing exist inside a charged world of restriction. In many southern states, laws and local customs discourage or punish teaching enslaved people to read, especially after earlier revolts had deepened white fears of literacy, communication, and organized resistance. The details vary by place, but the atmosphere is broadly clear. Knowledge in black hands makes the slave-holding order uneasy. A person who can read a pass can question a pass. A person who can read a newspaper can follow politics. A person who can write can send news, keep names, preserve family, or plan escape. The written word becomes suspicious precisely because it strengthens the mind, so learning often takes indirect forms. A child watches letters in a Bible while someone else turns the pages. A house servant notices words on labels, signs, and papers carried through a room. An enslaved boy stands near a white child's lesson and absorbs the alphabet by listening. A girl helping in a kitchen watches a recipe, a shopping list, a letter, and begins to connect marks with sounds. Someone scratches letters into dust with a stick, then smooths them over with a shoe. Someone spells by candlelight in a cabin after the others have settled. The scene is quiet, but the stakes are not. The sensory world of secret learning is intimate. The whisper of a page turning, the faint grit of dirt under a fingertip tracing a letter, the warmth of a shoulder pressed close so two people can see one scrap of text, the smell of tallow candle, smoke, and old paper, the ache in tired eyes after a day of labour. To learn under such conditions is to make a bargain with exhaustion. The body says sleep, the mind says not yet. Memory becomes a form of schooling in itself. When books are scarce or forbidden, Information is carried in the mouth and mind. Names of places, family lines, verses of scripture, stories of who was sold where, prices, political rumours, the order of roads, the reputation of an owner, the wording of a law heard once and repeated many times. Memory here is not passive storage, it is disciplined preservation. A person may hold an astonishing amount of knowledge without ever being allowed a notebook. Human beings, when denied paper, often become paper. In free black communities, schooling can be more formal, though still unequal and uncertain. Churches, mutual aid societies, private teachers, and community leaders organise schools where they can. Some children attend separate public schools in northern cities. Others study in church basements or small rented rooms with too few books, crowded benches, and limited supplies. The room may be draughty in winter and stifling in summer. Slates click, chalk dust rises. A teacher corrects posture, pronunciation, spelling, sums. Order matters because resources are thin and every minute must count. Parents often pursue education with fierce seriousness. A father working long hours may still insist that his child recite lessons in the evening. A mother taking in washing may save carefully for copybooks or tuition. Education offers no guarantee of equality, but it offers tools. Reading contracts, following politics, understanding scripture directly, writing letters to distant family, keeping account books, presenting oneself before a hostile world with evidence of discipline and intelligence. In a society eager to deny black capacity, education becomes both nourishment and argument. You step into one of these schoolrooms and feel the texture of effort. The bench is hard. The air smells of wool coats drying from rain, chalk, lamp smoke, and ink. Children shift, whisper, then fall still when the teacher raises a hand. Some students are very young, others are older than modern classrooms would expect, because education has come late or in fragments. A teenage boy may labour by day and study reading at night. A grown woman may practice writing her own name after years of signing with a mark. Learning does not belong to the young alone when a people has been denied it by force. Newspapers matter enormously. In cities, literate black readers may share news aloud in homes, church meetings, shops, boarding houses, and association halls. One copy can travel through many hands. Ink smudges the fingers, the pages rustle. Articles on politics, abolition, violence, law, and community affairs are read, discussed, challenged, remembered. A newspaper is not simply information. It is a gathering point for thought. It gives shape to distant events and names to powerful people who might otherwise seem to move in a separate world. It also provides a record that can be returned to, argued with, and preserved. Among free black Americans, self-education is often communal. A debating society may gather to discuss colonization, rights, religion, labour, or national politics. A minister may lecture on history. A barber shop may become an informal classroom of current events. A seamstress with literacy may read a letter aloud for a neighbour. A sailor may bring printed material from another port. A child who learns faster than the rest may help younger siblings in the evening. Knowledge travels sideways as much as downward from teacher to student. A charming and telling detail from the period lies in the use of spellers and primers as treasured possessions. A small, battered school book might be wrapped carefully in cloth, protected from damp, and treated almost like a family asset. Margins could hold marks, names, or practice lines. Pages might loosen from heavy use. The book itself became evidence of aspiration, not luxurious, not decorative, simply precious. There is something moving about a worn primer surviving in a room that had almost nothing spare. For enslaved people, literacy can create both practical power and serious danger. A person known to read may attract suspicion from owners, overseers, or neighbours. Letters can be intercepted. Books can be confiscated. Teachers, black or white, can be threatened or punished, yet the desire persists. Historians continue to debate how widespread literacy actually was among the enslaved in 1860, because direct evidence is fragmentary and often filtered through hostile authorities or post-war recollection. What is beyond doubt is the intensity of the aspiration. Enough people learned, tried to learn, or valued learning that white authorities repeatedly acted to suppress it. Oppressive systems do not waste effort blocking what they consider harmless. Knowledge is not limited to letters. Black Americans in 1860 cultivate many kinds of expertise: herbal medicine, weather reading, animal handling, navigation by landscape, food preservation, sewing, carpentry, music, public speaking, theology, bargaining, and social interpretation. An older woman may know which plant sees fever, a boatman may read currents by colour and motion, a cook may judge heat by scent alone, a carpenter may estimate a board with astonishing accuracy. These forms of knowledge rarely receive the prestige that formal education receives, but they are no less real. In fact, daily life depends on them constantly. Still, literacy carries a unique symbolic charge because it intersects with law and status. A signed name, a read notice, a copied address. These acts push against a social order that wants black people visible as labour yet invisible as thinkers. Writing a letter can be quietly revolutionary. Imagine the scene. A room late at night, a candle low, ink thick in a little bottle, the pen awkward at first, then steadier. Dear wife, dear son, dear brother. A person writing into distance and insisting that thought may travel where the body cannot. Religion often supports learning as well. Scripture encourages literacy, and churches sometimes provide one of the safest spaces for instruction. A Bible lesson becomes a reading lesson. A hymn becomes memorization. A sermon inspires a child to know the text firsthand rather than only by hearing. In free communities, Sunday schools can offer basic literacy and moral education together. In enslaved communities, even where open instruction is limited, biblical language and memorized verse build habits of verbal precision and recall. The sacred and the educational overlap constantly. There is also political knowledge, which grows sharper as national tensions deepen. Black Americans listen to speeches, election talk, legal decisions, and abolitionist arguments with particular attention because the stakes are personal. Free black activists track conventions, petitions, and legislation. Enslaved listeners gather fragments from white conversation, newspapers overheard, and travellers' reports. A name like Lincoln may travel into quarters long before many know exactly what kind of president he will be. Information arrives unevenly, but it arrives. People compare stories, test rumours, and ask what any change might actually mean. A wise habit. Grand claims have disappointed them before. Children experience learning as both burden and delight. Some recitations are tedious, some slates break, some sums refuse to behave, but there is also pride. The first clear letter written well, the first passage read aloud without stumbling, the teacher's nod, the parents' pleased silence, which may mean more than applause. In homes where adults were denied education, a child's progress can feel almost sacred. It opens not only a future, but a correction. Something withheld is being restored, even if only partially. Women play crucial roles in transmitting knowledge, formal and informal. They teach prayers, songs, recipes, family history, practical skills, manners, caution, and often literacy itself where possible. A mother may not have attended school long, yet still insist on proper speech and clear recitation. A grandmother may not read, yet preserve a lineage with flawless memory. Historians have increasingly emphasized this household pedagogy because earlier narratives too often defined education too narrowly, as if only classrooms counted. In truth, much of the black learning in 1860 happens at tables, hearths, washyards, prayer meetings, and beside sick beds. The hunger for news creates its own rituals. Someone returns from town with a report. Others gather. Who said what? Which state is threatening what? Was there a speech? Was there a riot? Did the paper mention a law? Was the story trustworthy? In such moments, listening becomes a shared civic act. Faces turn toward the speaker. Silence deepens. The room itself seems to lean in. Information can warm, chill, or unsettle everyone at once. One scholarly uncertainty remains especially interesting. Historians still argue over how much clandestine literacy and political awareness among the enslaved went entirely undocumented. The nature of secrecy makes proof difficult. Success often left little trace. A hidden lesson that remained hidden is, by definition, hard to recover, but scattered testimonies, wartime recollections, account books, letters, and later narratives suggest a richer underground of learning than older scholarship once assumed. Silence in the archive does not always mean silence in life. As evening settles, study often returns to the smaller scale, a parent and child over one book, a young man sounding out words under his breath, a woman folding away a newspaper after reading it aloud, a church elder reviewing notes before a meeting, a tired labourer simply listening, eyes closed, while someone else reads. The room grows dim, the candle shortens. The day has already taken so much, yet the mind still reaches. What makes learning so powerful in this world is that it enlarges the self against a system trying to shrink it. To know a word is to hold a tool. To know a law is to see the structure of injustice more clearly. To know a history is to refuse the lie that your people began in bondage. To know how to write a name is to place identity on a page in your own hand. Even when danger surrounds it, knowledge changes posture. It gives inward room. By the time the house quiets and the last lesson is put away, the atmosphere softens. The page is closed, the slate wiped, the little book wrapped and set carefully aside. Outside, the night carries crickets, distant wheels, maybe a dog somewhere beyond the lane. Inside, one final phrase may still be repeated in the dark so it will not be forgotten by morning. In that whisper, half study and half prayer, you hear one of the clearest truths of black life in 1860. The hunger to learn is not ornamental. It is part of survival, part of dignity, and part of the long work of preparing the mind for a world that has not yet agreed to be just. Rumour arrives before certainty, and in 1860 rumour is everywhere. It moves along roads, through kitchens, across docks, between pews, inside barber shops, down alleys, over fences, and into cabins after dark. You hear it in the lowered voice that says a name twice before trusting it. Lincoln, secession, convention, union, war. You hear it in the quick exchange at a market stall, in the newspaper read aloud to a crowded room, in the muttered debate between men who cannot agree whether this time anything will truly change. The country is talking to itself constantly, and black Americans are listening with especially careful ears, because when white politics shifts, black lives are usually the first to feel the ground move. The autumn of 1860 carries a particular tension. Campaign news drifts through every sort of place, even those with no ballot box in reach. Free black communities in northern cities follow the presidential election with intense interest, though voting rights remain limited and unequal. In some states, black men can vote under certain conditions. In many others, they cannot. Yet exclusion does not produce indifference. Quite the opposite. People who are denied political voice often become sharp students of politics, because decisions are still made about them whether they participate formally or not. A hard education, a useful one. You step into a room above a church hall where several men and women gather around a newspaper. The page is already soft at the folds from repeated reading. Lamp smoke curls faintly toward the ceiling. The table smells of oil, ink, and old wood. Outside, wheels grind over the street and then fade. Inside, someone reads the results again, carefully, line by line. Abraham Lincoln has won the presidency in November 1860. He does so without carrying the slaveholding deep south. The fact lands with a weight everyone can feel, though no one can yet measure it fully. Hope enters the room, but it does not leap. It steps in cautiously, looking over its shoulder. Black Americans have too much experience to trust easy triumph. Some are heartened because Lincoln is associated with opposition to the spread of slavery into the territories. Some are less certain, noting that he is not an abolitionist in the most immediate and sweeping sense. Some ask what a president can really do against the entrenched power of slave states, federal law, hostile courts, and violent custom. The mood is not simple celebration. It is more like careful inhaling after a long strain, followed by the question of whether the air can be trusted. In enslaved communities, political news arrives in fragments and often without full explanation. A name spoken by white men in the yard, a newspaper headline glimpsed while carrying coal, a conversation overheard from a porch, a driver returning from town with scraps of report, an owner pacing more than usual, a mistress crying, a white child repeating adult fears without understanding them. Black listeners gather these fragments and test them against one another. Who is Lincoln? Why are they angry? Why are they afraid? What happens if states leave the Union? What is secession exactly? When information comes like scattered nails, people still try to build something solid from it. The emotional atmosphere changes fastest among white Southerners committed to slavery. Their language grows sharper. Secession, once threatened, now feels immediate. South Carolina begins the process in December 1860, and other Deep South states soon move in the same direction. Black Americans watch white fear and fury with intense attention. Powerful people rarely rage without consequence for the vulnerable. That alone is enough to make every rumor matter. The sound of political anger in white voices can be more chilling than the details of any speech. You can feel this on the street in southern towns. Men cluster in front of newspaper offices or boots scrape. Spit darkens the dust. Voices rise and overlap. Secession meetings are discussed in shops, taverns, and court squares. Flags appear, toasts are made, speeches are praised. But beneath the public confidence there is also strain. Slaveholders and their allies know that slavery sits at the heart of this crisis. Even when they wrap their arguments in grand talk of rights and honor, black people hear that too. They understand the translation. When they say rights, they often mean the right to hold us. Among free black Americans in the North, discussion grows more lively and more divided as the winter nears. Church basements, meeting halls, and private homes fill with debate. Should black communities trust a Republican victory at all? Will white Northerners stand firm if Southern states threaten disunion? Could secession somehow weaken slavery by forcing a reckoning? Or will crisis produce greater danger for black people, especially under the Fugitive Slave Act and in border regions where panic can encourage kidnappings, arrests, and mob action? The questions come quickly because the stakes are intimate. Politics, once again, is not theory. It is household weather. A curious little feature of this moment is how often ordinary objects become carriers of national tension. Newspapers passed from hand to hand, campaign ribbons, broadside announcements, letters folded into pockets, a torn scrap of print saved for later. Even a railroad timetable can provoke speculation, because movement of people and mail now feels tied to larger events. America in 1860 is not fully modern, but it is connected enough that rumour travels fast and certainty travels slowly. Perhaps one of history's less charming combinations. Enslaved people often interpret political change through practical questions rather than abstract doctrine. Will there be more patrols? Will owners sell people farther south before anything changes? Will hiring out continue? Will travel be restricted? Will the army come? Will war mean freedom or just harsher discipline? Such questions reveal real wisdom. Grand events are judged by their local consequences. A person who has seen promises fail learns to ask not what speeches claim, but what tomorrow's rules will feel like on the skin. Some slaveholders react to the growing crisis by tightening control. Meetings may be watched more closely. Night movement becomes riskier. Passes harder to secure. Conversations interrupted. White anxiety sharpened surveillance because the spectre of revolt has long haunted slave societies. The possibility of national rupture intensifies that fear. Historians still debate how widespread this tightening was in late 1860 versus early 1861, because local evidence varies and memory sometimes telescopes events together. But enough accounts survive to show a familiar pattern. White panic tends to fall heavily on black bodies. At the same time, hope stirs in forms that are sometimes visible and sometimes hidden. A woman in bondage hears that the new president may not favour slavery's expansion and allows herself one private moment of possibility before returning to work. A free black minister shapes a sermon more boldly than he would have dared a year earlier. A young man in a northern city begins attending more political meetings. A family listens to election news and feels, for one evening, that history might be turning its face toward them, though not yet its hand. Hope here is disciplined. It does not dance wildly. It sits upright and waits to see what survives the winter. Talk of emigration still appears in some circles, though it remains controversial. Some black leaders reject the idea entirely, insisting that the United States is as much their country as anyone else's, built in large part by black labour and black suffering. Others, worn down by relentless racism, consider whether life elsewhere could offer greater dignity. Liberia is one topic of discussion, though not an easy or universally respected one. The argument itself tells you something important. Even in a moment of political suspense, black Americans are not all of one mind. They are thinking strategically, morally, and practically in different ways, as real communities always do. You enter a river landing where boatmen, labourers, and travellers trade news with rough efficiency. The air smells of mud, rope, wet wood, and tobacco. Someone says South Carolina will surely go. Another says the federal government will never allow it. A third mutters that rich men talk bravely, while poor men will do the dying. Nearby, a black labourer says little, but listens to everything. That kind of listening is its own political act. Gather first, speak later. The powerful often reveal more than they intend when they assume you are merely present as background. For black children, the season of rumours filters down in half-understood phrases. Lincoln is a name they hear often. So is war. Adults speak more softly when they think children are not listening, which of course guarantees that children listen harder. A boy may sense tension in the way his father folds a newspaper. A girl may notice her mother pausing in the middle of sewing when neighbours arrive with fresh news. The household mood shifts before the facts are explained. Children learn history first through atmosphere. Newspapers in black communities take on even greater importance during this period. Editors and readers pass speeches, party positions, secession threats, and federal responses. Meetings discuss what obligations free black citizens and residents might have if conflict comes. Some speakers urge vigilance, others emphasize preparation, mutual aid, and caution. There is excitement, yes, but also sober realism. No one with experience of American race politics expects deliverance to come without complications. The Republic has disappointed too often to earn easy trust. In enslaved quarters, the circulation of rumour can be both electrifying and dangerous. One person says Lincoln will free everyone at once. Another insists no such thing will happen. Someone has heard that white men are drilling with weapons. Someone else has heard that troops may march. Stories swell, shrink, and change as they pass. Some are plainly false, Some are partly true. Some contain emotional truth, even where details are wrong. Historians continue to argue over how politically informed enslaved communities were at specific moments, because sources are fragmentary and often mediated by white observers. But the persistence of rumour itself proves active attention. People do not speculate intensely about futures they do not care about. There is also dread, war, even a war that might weaken slavery, promises danger. Armies consume food, land, labour, and lives. Border regions could become unstable. Retaliation could be fierce. White violence could intensify before any liberation arrives. A free black family in a northern city may worry about riots as much as about southern rebellion. An enslaved family may fear sale before freedom. The approach of a storm does not feel gentle simply because rain is needed, yet imagination begins to stretch. That may be the most important development of all. Possibility itself grows wider. The notion that the slaveholding order might not remain fixed forever becomes easier to picture. Not certain, not immediate, but thinkable. A man walking home in the cold may suddenly let his mind travel where he has trained it not to travel too far. A mother braiding her daughter's hair may wonder what girlhood might look like under different laws. A minister at his desk may draft words that lean more openly toward justice than caution. When politics shifts, imagination often moves first, even before institutions do. The winter air grows sharper as the year ends. Breath fogs in northern streets. In the south, nights carry a damp chill over fields and roads. Fires are built, doors closed, windows checked. Inside, people continue to talk, not endlessly. Fatigue always interrupts, but enough to keep speculation alive, enough to make silence impossible. Somewhere, a candle burns low over a newspaper column. Somewhere, white men drink to secession. Somewhere, an enslaved woman lies awake hearing the word freedom in her mind without daring to say it loud. Somewhere, a child asks whether war is far away and receives an answer too vague to satisfy. What life feels like in this moment is not resolution, but suspense thick enough to touch. Black Americans know that the nation has reached a dangerous threshold. They know that white conflict over slavery is becoming impossible to ignore. They know that power is shifting, though not yet how. So they listen, compare, argue, pray, prepare, doubt, and hope in measured ways. They do what sensible people do when the future approaches with heavy footsteps and an unreadable face. By the time the night settles fully and the last visitor has gone home, the room grows still again. The newspaper is folded, the chair legs stop scraping, the fire sinks lower, but the mind does not settle so easily. Names, dates, threats, possibilities all continue to move through the dark. In that restless quiet, you understand something essential. The coming crisis is not just being made in state houses and newspaper offices. It is also being felt in small homes, crowded rooms, field paths, church halls, workshops, and cabins where Black Americans weigh every rumour against a lifetime of hard experience and ask, with equal parts caution and longing, whether the world is finally preparing to change. The year closes with a strange stillness, the kind that is not truly calm at all. It is the stillness of rooms where people are listening for news, of roads where every rider may be carrying consequences, of households where ordinary tasks continue because they must, even while the mind keeps drifting toward larger dangers. In late 1860 and the opening edge of 1861, Black Americans live inside that tension. The bread still needs baking. The floor still needs sweeping. The fire still needs tending. Children still need shoes, food, and sleep. Yet over all of it hangs the sense that the country has stepped onto a narrow ledge and does not know how far down the drop may be. You feel it in the winter air, in northern cities. The cold sharpens the lungs and turns breath pale in the street. Wheels cut through dirty snow. Coal smoke lowers the sky and settles into cloth. In southern towns, the season is softer, but still carries its own chill. A dampness in the ground after dark, a greyness at dawn, a hush over fields lying quiet for the moment. People stand in doorways and look down roads longer than usual. The weather itself seems to pause, as if the land is waiting with everyone else. For enslaved black Americans, this season of uncertainty can feel both dangerous and full of terrible possibility. Owners talk more. They write letters, attend meetings, pace porches, read newspapers with grim faces, and speak of secession, rights, and federal betrayal. Enslaved listeners hear enough to know that the people who control them are alarmed. That matters. Powerful men do not usually admit fear openly, and when they do, everyone nearby notices. A planter who once discussed cotton prices now talks of militia companies. A neighbour who cared mostly for horses now argues about arsenals and forts. A mistress who normally fusses over table linen now cries over the Union. Black Americans read these changes carefully, because white distress can mean opportunity, but it can also mean retaliation. On some plantations and farms, the routines remain outwardly the same. Morning labour begins, tools are distributed, meals are cooked, livestock are fed. The repetitive structures of slavery continue to grind forward because the system cannot simply pause while politics shakes the nation. Yet the emotional climate inside those routines shifts. A command may come more harshly than usual. A gathering may be questioned, a pass denied, a conversation interrupted. White anxiety often makes itself felt through tighter control, as if fear can be managed by narrowing someone else's life. That narrowing may take practical forms. Owners who fear unrest may restrict travel between plantations. Night visits become harder. Patrols more alert, meetings more suspect. A husband hoping to visit a wife on another place may find the road effectively closed. A woman who usually carries produce to market may be watched more carefully. Even worship can grow tense if white authorities begin to imagine danger in every assembly. The net tightens not because black Americans have changed, but because white society senses its own instability. At the same time, instability alters imagination. In quarters, kitchens, workshops, and urban homes, people speak more carefully, but they also think more boldly, not foolishly, not with easy confidence. Black Americans have learned too much from disappointment for that. Still, there are moments when thought stretches farther than it did a year earlier. What if these men really do break apart? What if a war weakens slavery? What if armies move through the South? What if the old order can be shaken loose? Such thoughts may be whispered only in fragments, or held entirely in silence, but they exist. Possibility, once nearly unbearable to imagine, has become harder to suppress. Free black communities face their own uneasy winter. In northern cities, political meetings continue, church discussions grow more urgent, and newspapers are read with almost painful attentiveness. The question is no longer whether sectional conflict is serious. The question is what form it will take, and whether black Americans will find greater safety or greater peril in what comes. There is hope that the slave power may be challenged. There is fear that white backlash, riot, legal repression, or wartime disorder may sweep vulnerable communities into fresh danger. A free black family may sit down to supper with one ear turned toward the street, wondering whether national crisis will remain in headlines or step suddenly onto their block. You enter one such home on a cold evening. A lamp throws a yellow pool over the table. A newspaper lies folded beside a bowl and spoon. The room smells of stew, wool drying near the stove, and a hint of kerosene. A father reads aloud about South Carolina's departure from the Union. His voice remains steady, but the room changes around the words. A child asks what leaving the Union means. The adults answer carefully, because the truth is not yet clear even to them. It means trouble, perhaps war. It means white men are willing to tear apart the country to protect slavery. It means history has stopped pretending to be patient. Secession itself is a revealing drama to black observers. The speeches of secessionists are full of constitutional language, regional grievance, and theatrical dignity. Yet beneath the formal phrases lies a plain reality. They are willing to rupture the Republic because they believe slavery must be protected and expanded. Black Americans do not need every speech explained to understand this. They know the system from underneath. They know what it feeds upon. When white leaders speak grandly of property, order, or Southern civilization, black listeners hear the truer sentence beneath it. They're talking about us. The ordinary scenes of life continue to carry this knowledge. A laundress in a city yard wrings shirts while listening to a neighbour describe fresh news from the station. An enslaved carpenter planes a board, while two white men nearby argue about forts and tariffs. A cook in a boarding house keeps her face composed while guests debate whether secession is madness or courage. A black sailor watches white passengers cluster around a paper on the wharf and knows from their tight gestures that the news is worsening. History enters not only through formal declarations, but through posture, silence, and tone. There is a curious sharpness to this period because so many people still do not know what they know. White Southerners say they can leave peacefully. White Northerners argue about compromise. Moderates search for formulas. Radicals predict blood. Newspapers speculate endlessly. In black communities, that uncertainty is experienced less as confusion than a suspended risk. The details may be unclear, but the direction is visible. The old balance is failing. No one can say yet what will replace it, but everyone can feel the failure. A small but telling detail appears in domestic preparations. People save more than usual, food put by carefully, clothing mended with extra attention, coins hidden, important papers checked twice. Such acts are not theatrical, yet they reveal instinctive understanding. When the world grows unstable, households prepare in humble ways first. A free black mother secures her family's documents. A father advises his son to avoid crowds. An enslaved man hides away a little food if he can. These are ordinary acts of caution, but ordinary caution has a way of becoming historical when storms truly come. Black preachers and community leaders bear a special burden in this moment. Their people want guidance, but guidance is hard when facts shift daily. Some preach patience and moral steadiness. Some speak more openly of divine judgment upon slavery. Some urge vigilance, discipline, and readiness to help one another if disorder spreads. Sermons in this winter often carry a dual tone: comfort, because people are afraid; gravity, because fear is justified. A congregation may leave warmed by song and prayer, only to step back into a street full of fresh rumours before reaching home. Enslaved communities must assess risk with even greater care. Too much visible hope could provoke punishment. Too much credulity could lead to heartbreak. Too much passivity could leave opportunities unnoticed. People therefore listen with a particular kind of guarded intelligence. They note militia drills. They notice owners moving valuables. They hear when white men discuss local defence. They observe whether roads grow busier, whether strangers arrive, whether letters come more often. Even children absorb the mood. Adults speak in lowered tones, and the young learn from the weight in those tones that something beyond ordinary life is pressing close. Historians still argue over how clearly enslaved people in different regions understood the exact constitutional and military issues unfolding around secession. That uncertainty is natural. Access to information varied enormously. Yet exact constitutional knowledge is not the same thing as political understanding. A person need not pass every legal phrase to grasp that slaveholders are in a furious struggle over the future of slavery. Judged by that standard, black political understanding was often acute. Experience had trained it. Free black activists also confront a moral question with practical edges. If war comes, what role will black Americans play in the defense of a nation that has so often denied them full belonging? The answer is not simple, but many already sense that this conflict, if it arrives, cannot remain merely a white man's constitutional quarrel. Slavery has made the crisis. Black lives are tied to its outcome. Some men speak of service, others of caution, others of demanding rights in return for loyalty. The discussion itself is remarkable. A people repeatedly told they are outside the nation are already considering how they may be called to save it. The landscape of early 1861 reflects all of this unease. In ports, ships come and go under a cloud of talk. In court squares, men cluster around notices. In farmyards, chores continue under the same sky that now feels altered. In church halls, prayers grow more fervent. In cabins, songs sound softer or stranger, as if carrying questions words alone cannot hold. In city neighbourhoods, doors shut earlier. In boarding houses, lamps burn later over newspapers and long conversations. You can smell smoke, wool, wet wood, stale ink, horses, cooked greens, cold iron, lamp oil, and river mud. And through all of it runs the invisible scent of anticipation, which is really just fear mixed with hope and kept waiting too long. Then there is the emotional burden of not knowing when the change will come. Human beings can endure a great deal when the shape of the future is at least visible, but suspense wears the nerves thin. Every week seems to carry another event, another speech, another threat, another reassurance that convinces no one. Black Americans must continue working, parenting, worshipping, bargaining, cooking, mending, and surviving while carrying this suspense in the body. It settles in the stomach, in the jaw, in the way sleep comes lightly and breaks easily. And yet, within this strain, dignity continues its quiet labour. Children are still taught their prayers. Clothes are still brushed for Sunday. Bread is still shared. Songs are still sung. A man still shaves carefully before church. A woman still braids a little girl's hair with tenderness. Neighbours still knock softly and step inside with news, comfort, or simple company. The world may be approaching violence, but ordinary human care refuses to disappear in advance. That refusal matters. It keeps people from being reduced entirely to fear. There is no neat ending available inside this winter threshold. The nation is breaking, but not yet remade. Slavery still stands, but no longer with the same unchallenged confidence. Freedom is not at hand, yet it has become imaginable in new and unsettling ways. For Black Americans, the last quiet before war is not quiet at all. It is a season of sharpened listening, guarded hope, tightened control, practical preparation, spiritual endurance, and minds turning steadily toward a future that may bring rescue, danger, grief, upheaval, or all of them braided together. When night settles fully over the road, the field, the dock, the alley, and the cabin, the same darkness covers everyone, though not equally. Somewhere, white men talk loudly of secession and honour. Somewhere, a black family lowers its voices and protects its courage carefully. Somewhere, an enslaved child falls asleep to the sound of adults whispering. Somewhere, a free black reader folds the newspaper and stares at the lamp flame for a long moment before blowing it out. The country stands on the edge of war. Black Americans stand on that edge too, but with a different knowledge in their hearts. They know exactly what the struggle beneath the speeches is about, because they have been living inside its consequences all along. Now the room grows softer. The voices recede. The edges of the world begin to blur into night. You let the cold outside remain outside and keep only the gentler details close. A small fire settling into red embers. A wooden floor cooling beneath bare feet. The faint smell of smoke in clean cloth. The quiet rise and fall of breathing from those already asleep. Somewhere far off, a wheel turns once on a distant road. Then all is still again. You do not need the whole future tonight. You only need this calm dark, this slow air, this sense of human lives gathered close against uncertainty. A mother has finished her prayers. A child has curled into warmth. A candle has gone low and soft. The newspaper is folded. The door is latched. The last murmured conversation has drifted into silence, and in that silence, history no longer feels like dates and speeches. It feels like people resting where they can, loving where they can, hoping carefully where they can. It feels like hands finally unclasping after a long day. It feels like a mind releasing its grip on worry for a few tender moments. Outside, the winter night stretches wide and quiet. Inside, the heart grows lighter, so let the sounds fade now. Let the room dim further. Let the road disappear into darkness, and the voices of the anxious world drift farther away. Hold only the gentlest things, the warmth of the hearth, the safety of blankets, the softness of breath, the peace of knowing that even in hard times people made homes, kept faith, carried memory, and protected one another with extraordinary care. The night deepens, the air settles, everything slows, and now, at last, you can rest.